Welcome back to North Texas in Focus. My guest today is State Representative Jessica González. Representative González, thank you for joining the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And before we really get started here, I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about the dysfunction we've seen going on at the U.S. Capitol over the last few days with the speaker's vote.
Well, I'm just glad that the Texas House doesn't have the same rules that the Congress does.
And what's the distinction? How is it different in Texas compared to the U.S. Capitol?
Well, their procedural rules are different, much like the rules in the Texas House are different from the Texas Senate, right? And so they're able to basically have held hostage the body for a couple of days. We don't have the same parliamentary procedures here in Texas to where a small portion of folks can kind of just hold everything up. They'd like to, but our rules aren't such.
So if there was an instance, say, with the far right representatives who don't want to see Democratic committee chairs next session, they wouldn't be able to hold up the whole process over that issue.
No, they could not.
Okay, so
they would love to.
So that was actually that was my first question about the Democratic committee chairs and the far right faction, seeing if maybe they could do something like that. So it's interesting you started with that. But I did want to ask you, you filed a litany of bills already aimed at making it easier to vote. HB 386, 701, 702 through 705. I've done a little background research on them, but could you explain to folks what some of these bills do and which ones have the best chance of passing?
Sure. I'll start out with HB 386, which is curbside voting. And actually, this bill last session, during the regular session, we got a hearing on it that first day that we heard bills. It got voted out of committee unanimously. Unfortunately, it did not make it out of calendars to make it to the floor. I think a lot of them have potential of passing because they're just common sense elections bills, right? To kind of clean it up, make it easier for counties to run their elections, for elections workers to be able to do their job. But with curbside voting, several folks, especially those who have health concerns or disabilities, express concerns about difficulty accessing their ballot at curbside. So what this bill would do is that it would establish a specific parking space at each polling location that is clearly marked for voters who are unable to physically enter a polling place. So, for example, so it wouldn't be another parking spot that is designated as for folks with just a disability. So it wouldn't be just another handicap spot, because what ends up happening is that, let's say an election is held at a library, right? And so, because of ADA, laws, right, you have to have a spot designated for those who are handicapped. This would be a spot that's specific to voters who are unable to physically enter the polling place, versus them having to park in the designated handicap spot that somebody who may be visiting the library may already be using. So this would make that spot specifically available. 701, which is the online application. So as of right now, voters can access an application online and they can print it out and mail it. So this would direct the Secretary of State to implement a program that allows a registered voter to complete an application for early voting ballot by mail over the internet. And then it would also allow voters to check the status of their application online. And then it would streamline the data collection and maintenance responsibilities of the Secretary of State. So, a lot of these, will like this will have a cost saving effect, on counties and make it easier for folks who want to request their application. And they can do it online versus having to print it out, send it by mail, which, some people may not have the ability to do. The joint primary requirement, which is HB 702, this will be my third session that I have filed this bill, and and it has bipartisan support. And so, right now, although there are many counties in Texas that hold joint primary elections, there are many counties that conduct them separately. And so what ends up happening is that folks will show up to a polling place not knowing that it's not a joint primary, and let's say that you're voting in the Democratic primary and you show up at where the Republican primary is being held, you can't vote there. So you have to leave and you have to go to a different polling place. Some voters may not even go back because they may not have time, right? And so this would, and then also just this last election cycle, we heard of counties that didn't even have workers to work at certain primary polling locations, and so there was just nobody there, so you couldn't vote. And so this would, require counties to have them jointly, resulting in less confusion with voters and saving the county, money, because they don't have to have two separate locations. They can combine the equipment, combine election workers, and be a fully functioning polling place. Did you want me to continue running through?
No, because I have a couple of them right here, and I guess I just wonder
Sure.
because I can run through, and 703 seems like common sense legislation. The election judges get paid for an extra hour of work they're there. Of course, 704 opens voter pre-registration a little early for people under 18. And I just wonder, in this political climate, with these bills, a lot of them seeming like common sense, could you see a world where not only do they not pass, but the majority goes on the other side and looks to add further limitations and cutouts to voting?
Well, I mean, we've already seen, the first day that we were able to file legislation. I mean, we already saw that. I mean, one of the first ones that the representative who ultimately carried that I call the voter suppression bill from last year is to enhance the criminal penalties, right? And so there are still further restrictions that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to restrict further. And so it's hard to say. It's always hard to say whether legislation will pass or how far it'll get in the legislature, because the system is kind of set up to make it really hard. I think for a reason, right? But we can expect that there are going to be folks that are going to try to further change the laws to limit folks from being able to access the ballot box.
And if those laws did get changed in a way that went against the principles of your caucus, do you think something similar to 2021, like a walkout, could be on the table?
I think it's always on the table, and unfortunately, since Democrats are in the minority, we don't have the votes, right? And so if they want to push something through, just much like we saw throughout the multiple sessions last year, that is like the last resort, the nuclear option. But most certainly, it's definitely on the table.
And to follow up on that, would you consider last session's walkout a success in terms of bringing attention to the issue?
Absolutely. I think that folks didn't really know that this was also happening in other states across the country, that they were rolling back voting rights because, for political purposes, just trying to suppress people's votes. But I think that it most certainly did, because they did strip out some language in the original bill that came to the floor that was going to restrict social to polls efforts. And I mean, it was clear who that was aimed at, what community that was aimed at. And so when the bill ultimately came back, that language was removed. And then also language that referenced the purity of the ballot box, which had been used historically to disenfranchise people. So I think in that regard, yes, it was successful to that extent, although they did ultimately, pass the massive piece of legislation that overhauled our elections process.
Mhm. And just to move away from the policy a little and look at the politics, I wonder if you agree with my framing here. Why did Democrats overperform nationally but underperform in Texas?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I'd like to I would imagine that part of that was just the change in our election laws here in Texas. We had heard of folks, their applications to vote by mail were being rejected due to like, some of the changes in the law. I mean, and I don't know, some of it may just be voter apathy, right? That folks kind of just saw what happened throughout the multiple sessions last year. And I just think that some folks may think, well, what does it matter if I vote or whether I don't vote, because my candidate's not going to win anyway. And that's not really the mind frame that folks should have. But I mean, that's my I guess my personal opinion as to why that happened.
And to follow up on that, I guess with all those kind of longtime candidates losing, people like Beto, Mike Collier, and you being something of a rising star in the party, could you see yourself ever being on a congressional or statewide ballot?
um, as of right now, I do not have desire to go to DC. But if I like what I'm doing right now as a state rep, but if an opportunity were to arise, I would consider it.
Mm. And with the session starting here in a couple days, when I do these interviews, I always try to ask at least one question about staff. And for you, is it on the good days and the bad days, is treating staff with respect and dignity, is that a core principle for you?
Absolutely. The I have the ability to do my job as a legislator because of my staff. Staff, especially, I mean, during session, I mean, they work all hours, and they make sure that I'm prepared and I have everything that I need for the day or for committee and on the House floor. And I embrace the in my office. I like for my staff to be able to work on the issues that they enjoy working on. Um, that just creates a happier environment. I like them to be challenged. I don't micromanage as long as they do their job. But yes, and I do not allow folks to disrespect my staff either. Visitors that come in, because that does happen. And so if you're not going to respect our team, my team, then you're not allowed to be in my office.
Mhm. And some of the representatives I've talked to before this session, or some of the representatives elect, Bojani, Palisa, Vinton Jones, something
Mhm.
they mentioned, and I don't know exactly how this works, but they were mentioning raising the allotment or staff salaries. If something like that came on the floor, is that something you'd get behind?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to. I believe that something similar was that somebody filed a rider in the budget. I believe it was last year. And I think that somebody files that every session. And I voted in favor. Really, it would be because it's not. It would be to raise our monthly allotment in the budget. And so there is chatter that there is a potential for them to raise our monthly budget again. They raised it a little bit last year, and so that would give us the ability to pay our staff more if we have more money to spread out. Because believe it or not, it's not too much, and so we do have to tap into our campaign money a lot of the time. If you exceed that monthly allotment, if just kind of depending on the experience and whatnot of your staff, that is an option as well. But yes, it and I know in Austin it's increasingly getting more and more expensive, and so people need to be able to make a living wage and be able to pay for their apartment, and what have you, without having to struggle. And it's a public service job. Sorry, my dog is barking back there.
Oh, that's okay. Stuff like that happens all the time. And just as a final question, as oh, he's here. Um, just as a final question, as someone who has access to behind closed doors, so to speak, at the Texas Capitol, just for people that might never have that experience, what's that like? When you get behind those doors at the Capitol, I mean, is it all just ego and hubris and talking over one another? Or do I have the wrong read and it's just like a place full of good listeners, both gentle and humble?
I think that there are definitely lots of egos in that capital. But I think that does happen. I mean, that can happen. But I think for the most part, the House kind of prides itself on trying to work with folks on the other side of the aisle, treating each other with respect. We do it within our rules when we are speaking from the back mic, right? So we have the front mic, which is typically when if you're laying out a bill, you're presenting it to the body to vote, and then the back mic is where members can come to the back and you can ask questions from the author about the bill, right? And so when you're that exchange at any point, whether it's in committee, whether it's on the House floor, I mean, our rules do say that you can't make personal attacks against your colleagues, and so they can stop your line of questioning if you say something inappropriate. But yes, I mean, I think that's been my experience. I don't think that I've had too many members, kind of just talk over me or shut me up. It's happened a couple, that happened some in my elections committee. If for those who may have followed that, that is not the norm. That is absolutely not the norm. Typically, if you're asked to be recognized, you're recognized. But yes, for the most part, it's people are amicable. You listen to each other, whether they listen to actually understand what you're talking about is another story.
Well, Representative Jessica González, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.